Hey, it's your girl Abbey, aka New Age Coach here, and I am lighting the way for those on their way to the light. And to my soul vibers, that is those of you who are already subscribed, thank you. Anyone new just tuning in, welcome. On this channel, we talk all things self and soul development. So if you like that vibe and want to join the tribe, hit subscribe. And if this is your first time tuning into this specific series, Coaching New Age Coach, this segment is all about introducing you to other fantastical human beings doing amazing stuff, lighting their own way to make this world a better, brighter place. So without further ado, let's take you to meet the guest of today.
Our guest of the day is the beautiful Elsie, aka Brujita from the block. And Elsie is a certified recovery coach. She is a current student of Reiki. She is a business owner. She receives channeled messages and she reads tarot cards intuitively. And she is also a fellow YouTuber. And on her channel, she talks all things holistic lifestyle, relationship advice, and spiritual psychology, which we will absolutely need to know more about in the conversation. So, Elsie, thank you for joining us today. So why don't you just pick up and kind of tell us a little bit about who you are in your own words?
Well, thank you for having me. It is an honor, my pleasure. So yeah, I think you pretty much covered everything. I, kind of like where I'm trying to take this whole journey of mine while sharing my own journey of my spiritual awakening is to kind of inspire people, give them some sort of, I guess, inspiration, like if they're trying to figure out what's going on with them. I think for me, I was just kind of like, I think I'm losing my mind, and then everything just kind of started clicking.
What happens?
Yeah, so just kind of like, letting people know, like, you're not alone, like other people have gone through this. And I know that there's a lot of people out there, a lot of resources that have shared that, but I just found that sharing my own journey, it's like, it's just another person, right? Like the more people that are being more open about their journey, the more comforting it is, for people to really see, like, I'm not in this alone. And yeah, and just kind of trying to guide everyone into whatever that path looks like, because I think it's so different from person to person. It's so different for everyone.
It is. And thank you for that. So your YouTube channel and your whole brand overall, I noticed you did start with Elsie XO, and then we kind of made this pivot to Brujita from the block. So why don't you kind of give us a little background about kind of what that means to you and kind of the branding around this, or what that even means for those who might not know what that means in Spanish.
So it's so funny. Someone recently, I made friends with someone in Canada, and I'm newly sober, so I'll be 6 months sober next month. So I started, thank you. So I started, you start looking up hashtags and connecting. I made friends with someone who's like similar, like parallel with me into the sobriety journey, and he's kind of going through his own spiritual awakening. So we check in on each other, and he asked me, because he doesn't speak Spanish, he was like, oh, so what's this?
So what is a brujata? A brujata?
So I was like, it means little witch. So I'm like, I know people probably can't tell in videos or in pictures even, because people are always so surprised. They're like, you're that short? So I'm 5'1". I'm not very tall.
Girl, you beat me. I'm 4'11". You beat me.
Like vertically challenged.
Yeah.
So it means little witch, and witch in the sense of just like someone who's like in alignment with like, the earth and the universe and that kind of stuff. I'm like, so, and then it's funny because recently I did start with Elsie XO. So my name is Elsie, and I've always kind of had the little like XO. It's been my Instagram handle for however long. Yeah. And it's just been, easy, just Elsie XO. So I started with that. And then I was like, do I really want to change like my whole Instagram account and everything? Yeah. And just with the YouTube, I was just kind of like, I don't know, like I had Love Elsie XO, like with Love Elsie XO. And then I was just kind of like, one day, literally I was in the shower and I don't know what, like it just came to me. And I hadn't been asking, like I was like, spirit, just like put something, like let me know what it is. Yeah. And so it just hit, like it just came to me, and I was just kind of like, from the block was funny because I'm from the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And so, Jenny from the block, like the J-Lo song. Yeah, so I was just kind of like, you know what, it just kind of.
Every time I see it, that song gets stuck in my head for like a solid 2 hours. That's why I'm asking.
Right. Then I pay attention to the way that I like my mannerisms, and people are like, oh, when they hear me talk, they're like, oh, you're from New York, oh, you're from the Bronx. Okay. Like, like, and I'm just like, all right, let's just put that identity together into something. So that's where that transition happens.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, thank you for that explanation. I think
And
that's
now you'll have the
hilarious.
song stuck in your head.
Yep, and now I'll be singing it after we get off this call. So thank you for that as well.
You're welcome.
I love doing it in the shower. That's when my good singing voice comes out. So
right. All of us. That's where I got the idea. When
exactly.
I was in the shower.
Hey, that's where things flow, literally, and metaphorically.
Exactly.
I'm all about that. That is my creative space. I did want to jump kind of right into. You brought up kind of a spiritual awakening and that being a big part of sharing your message. So why don't you? And you also kind of touched base really briefly about being sober. Which again, congratulations. That is no small feat. That's amazing. So why don't you walk the viewers through kind of your journey, like what a spiritual awakening means to you, or kind of how you started to understand that was happening to you, and just your whole kind of experience for stepping into that process.
Well, so I think for me, and I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to, or from whatever, I mean, I guess when we all go through it, we're so lucky. Imagine people going through this like before YouTube and all this stuff. Like, I'm like, how do people do anything?
YouTube was my life.
Right. Everything. I look up everything on YouTube. So for me, it happens like in levels. I feel I was always someone, I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school through 12th grade, and then I went to college and I took philosophy, and it was great because I was able to explore and question everything, because Catholicism didn't fully resonate with me, but I knew I believed in something. I just wasn't really in alignment with everything that I was being taught, because it just didn't, not to say that we have to have, that's the beautiful thing about spirituality. It's like you have faith, right? There's no concrete knowledge, but it's, so for me, I don't know, there was always something missing. So for me, it's happened in levels. So I was always, like I started collecting crystals years ago. I was always drawn to certain things. My first tarot deck was years ago, but I didn't fully feel connected to everything. And then, so for me, I guess it was this, I refer it as like I don't know, maybe there is like another level, and I hate to use the word levels, but it just happens. Yeah. Like it just, it happens. It comes in waves, I guess. Yeah. And so, this last wave was like a tsunami. So I was like, no, getting out of that. But so when it happened, I mean, I would say last year for me. But I will say that last year I really had no idea what was going on, and I really was just convinced that I was just losing my mind. I was like, this is it. This is how it ends.
Retrospect where you look back and then you realize something.
Yeah, I know. In that moment, I was just kind of like, well, this is how it ends. This is my story, and that's. But then I realized now, I'm like, that was the beginning, and I didn't even know I was like in that beginning. I know that there's no going back from this point. Like, it's only up from here, only forward from here, Was
there like a triggering event? Like, did sobriety like start to get you on that path, or were there life situations, or like what? Like, obviously, like we're talking about is chicken and egg spirituality always exists. It's whether you tap in and connect and recognize it. But what would you say was kind of that pivotal like transition? There's always, what people call the dark night of the soul, or these really big life events set us off on this like path. So how would you kind of explain where you recognize, oh, something in my life happened, therefore it pushed me to realize something bigger is happening?
So for me, I think that dark night of the soul was, I was engaged, and I was expecting last year, and I had a miscarriage. And so that I got really depressed after that. And with the depression came like bouts of anxiety. I've always been a mental health advocate. I'm just very pro, so I've always worked with a therapist, but at this point, and in the past, like I have like got, taken medication for anxiety or depression or whatever, because it's been a crutch, and I'm not going to say that it wasn't helpful. It definitely helps me function to the points of like getting up, going to work, taking care of my family and paying my bills. But it wasn't going down to that core wound and what really needed to heal. And, in therapy, obviously things would come up and I would work through stuff. But for me, it's like, I try to explain it like, how people are like lactose intolerant and they just can't have milk. Like it just doesn't agree with them. I got to that point that I realized like, I just can't consume alcohol. It just doesn't like resonate with me. that's the thing with sobriety, because I know people that go into sobriety and then they're just like, alcohol is evil, no one should have alcohol. That's like a whole different
Conversation.
topic. Yeah, because that's so for me, it's such a personal decision. Like I just know that it's not for me, because initially when I got sober, you know, things were getting really tough in my relationship, and it was near the end, and I had actually stopped drinking 2 weeks before we split. And I don't know, it was just, you know, it's like when you drink, it's like, you know, when you're intoxicated and you're not thinking straight, but that lingers for a while. And after taking a break for 2 whole weeks and not drinking, that point 2 weeks out, I looked at everything completely different. Like I had this clarity that I was just kind of like, wait, none of this resonates. Like, you know, and then so at first it wasn't this, I'm just going to be sober decision. It was just like, I need to stop drinking, because we were both, you know, living that lifestyle, and we were clashing. And, you know, with being, you know, with drinking and stuff like that, like obviously it brings up emotions and you don't really have a good handle on them. So I was like, one of us needs to have a clear head. So I was like, I'm going to make the sacrifice. That's going to be me. But then after a while, I was just kind of like, you know what? I actually feel the best, regardless of everything that was happening that was, you know, falling over. Like I felt like the rug got pulled from like right under me. But I felt the most stable I ever felt. Like of course I cried. Of course you know, I was sad and I had emotions, but it wasn't like I was not on medication anymore. I wasn't on anything, like no mood stabilizers, no antidepressants, nothing. And then I stopped drinking and I felt so stable. And I was just kind of like, wow, like the sadness comes and I'll cry and then it'll go. And nothing was lingering anymore, you know? And everything was kind of clear. And so then I was just kind of like, you know what, this is it. I'm just not drinking ever again. Like, that's it.
Right. And that's kind of what sets you on that path, is that first choice.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, like chicken and the egg, like chicken or the egg. I really don't know. I don't know if it just happened simultaneously that like, you know, after I got sober, I was just kind of like, you know, I started meditating more, and I'm like, and you feel great. And this is like that high that you were looking for, just like naturally.
That's what happens for real. You're like, oh, but then there's like this borderline, which again, it's like a whole different topic of like spirituality being an addiction to and replacing it. Like that could be a whole nother conversation. But
right.
You know,
oh my gosh, yes.
Actually, this is a great segue for the next question I wanted to ask you, because from listening to you, so it sounds like the first kind of part that I want to bring out is you talked about taking a philosophy class, understanding your background, your religion, and philosophy was the first time you got to start to ask questions. There was no right answer. There was no universal truth. You got to poke holes in everything and kind of figure out what means what to you, which I think is so important. And then you've brought up this idea of, you know, you going through your own therapy and using medicine, whether that was alcohol or real, you know, antidepressants and physical medication. So I think that brings up a good point about when it's appropriate to use medicine, if you're using real medicine to treat a spiritual ailment, or you have a spiritual ailment that you're trying to treat with real medicine. Then we talk about biology. We talk about all of these things are interlinked: biology, psychology, science, spirituality, and you've come up with this term kind of spiritual psychology. So I really want to get into your brain about what that means to you and kind of just any thoughts that come up, because I think that term is so dope. And if this isn't a real field, like you're onto some magic just with this kind of spiritual psychology term.
I have actually, like, I've never looked it up. I should. Like, I'm pretty sure. I feel like anytime I ever think about anything, I'm like, oh, that already exists, you know? So I
well, in some dimension it does.
Right. I was trying to figure out like what to call it, because I'm like, I didn't want to do like, I'm like spirituality and psychology or whatever. And I'm just like spiritual psychology, because I just would love to bridge that gap. So I studied psych undergrad. And the semester that I took philosophy, I actually took, I was taking abnormal psych along with that. And so, you know, I remember there was a student in my class that was very, very, very religious, you know, very, everything in the Bible was so concrete. And, you know, I was questioning everything because I was never allowed to. So, you know, she talks about like Moses in the burning bush. I'm like, or he could have been schizophrenic, or he could have had some bad mushrooms and he could have just been driven, like, you know, like trying to look at everything from every perspective. But yeah, so for me, it's just kind of like and I would love, honestly, to go back and take more, like, to further my, you know, education and see where I could really, like, what role I can play in this field. But, you know, because we talk about like addiction and how addiction can go from one to another, right? So that's why I decided to get certified as a coach. And so working in a clinical setting, it's like you're just working, you know, whatever rules go as far as, you know, the center that you're working for or whatever. I've been working slowly but surely to develop my own program, where I want to incorporate spirituality so that it's more holistic. So that, and I don't have anything against like detox and stuff like that, because some people do need that. But there are some people who aren't addicted to the point that they're living out in the street, right? Because it's like there's levels to addiction. And there are some people who, like myself, it's just like I was just an everyday drinker, and I was very reliant as far as like if I had a little bit of disruption in my life, I'm like, I need a drink, you know, and it wasn't like a want, it was like I need. And so there are people that are at that level where it's like it's a choice, right, to some extent. And I did struggle, I'm not going to lie. Like obviously chemical dependency is real, what it does to your brain, you know, I'm not discrediting that, but there are people that get to a point that they can't just make a decision to not do it anymore and that's it. And then there are people that can, and I feel like that's where I would like to, you know, come in. And for me, it was just more so everything holistic. Like there's, you know, when I stopped drinking, I found myself eating cookies like every single day, because your brain, like I would drink wine every single day, and that's a lot of sugar. And so my body is like, okay, like, so make up for it somehow, you know? And then there are people that start working out a lot or doing something a lot. So for me, everything was a lot at first. Like I was like doing tarot every day, I was meditating every day, like I still meditate every day. But there are certain things that I've learned to kind of stabilize now, because you become more mindful. I think mindfulness is such a big part of it, because you start to really observe your own behavior, and you're just kind of like, you know, even if it's like being on Instagram, like I've even had days where I'm just kind of like, you know, put the phone down, because now you're just like swiping. And it's not to be super critical of yourself, but just to be mindful of what your energy, you know. So
I think you make some good points just overall with the gap, right? Because I mean, firstly, I always talk about this concept in these segments about like spirituality sometimes can be a touchy word, right? Not everyone gravitates towards that, but it has so much depth to it, meaning like there are psychological reasons or chemical reasons, chemistry and psychology. There are reasons like neural pathways, things that you can explain that aren't necessarily spiritual in nature, but do tie to spiritual principles and concepts in different modalities. And that's a way to kind of get everyone using kind of whatever terminology they want to fit, because the end goal is like bettering yourself, like real tapping into your power and understanding who you are. But then there's also kind of this idea that I love that you talked about, where trying to bridge these gaps using all of these ologies, right? You know, psychology, physiology, all of the ologies, and makes like this new kind of umbrella of spiritual psychology. It is really hard sometimes for, like, I liked this idea you played with where, for example, if I have a backache, right? Like I could be someone who goes to the doctor and I'm prescribed this medicine for a backache because our medical field isn't in tune with this kind of field you're talking about. Yet really it could be a spiritual thing where maybe there's a root of something that's stuck at a cellular level or trauma level that I'm just not facing, and it's manifesting physically, right? Or vice versa, I could be thinking all of my ailments are spiritual in nature because I'm the spiritual person and want to meditate every single day and think there's a spiritual reason for everything, what there is, but there needs to be that balance in how you assess yourself and realize when it is time to actually get true treatment and a true professional advice. But using kind of spiritual psychology to bridge these worlds and like discrepancies between all these fields, because it's not like one field or industry against another and one's right or one's wrong. And I think that's the whole point about spirituality, is being so open. There isn't one universal truth. It's just, I guess there is love, but that's not my point. My point is there are different perspectives to look at all these things, and one doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's the awareness and how we collaborate, you know, to
I think we see that a lot, like especially with everything going on with, you know, like the pandemic and stuff, like you know, like with our medicine here, it's more so focused on like treatment, whereas in other parts of the world, there's a big focus on prevention, and like kind of like that, you know, combination of like Eastern and Western of like, well, what can we do? What herbs can we start incorporating into our diet, and, you know, and stuff like that? Because now, you know, I like been looking more into herbs and stuff, and I started making like licorice root tea and stuff like that. And all of that just really plays into like, general, I just feel like life is just a big balance. Like anything that you do, it's like you can't be too much one side, too much another side. It's like there's a sweet spot, you know,
Yeah.
because it's
I
like, you
haven't
know,
found
like
it myself,
like I
but
said,
yeah.
no, that's like the life journey.
Yeah.
Like my mother's very Catholic. She's very religious. And, you know, she's just like, oh, if I was to ever get cancer, I'm just going to pray. And I'm like, no, but there's treatment. Like you can't just pray things away. You got to do your part.
Yeah.
Like do both, you know? So that's where I feel when it comes to mental health and stuff. Like, you know, I'm very pro working with, you know, psychics or everyone developing their own psychic gifts to be able to trust your own intuition and stuff. But then there's also like, you know, the people that struggle with codependency, which, you know, we can see that as a trauma response from things in childhood. And there we're going into more of the psychology side of it, right? Like, so if they're, you know, naturally a very codependent person, and then, you know, they go from, you know, they become codependent on a psychic, like, you know, should I take this job? Should I not? It's like, no, you have to trust yourself, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just,
It's
lines
balance.
can always get blurred, but I think the constant thing is to always center yourself, like come back to yourself and try to see, you know, where you are on that level, I guess. Like, you know, you want to be in the middle.
That's a great
somewhere.
segue for kind of the next question. And it's more around spirituality in terms of that balance where there's action and there's belief, and it's kind of this marriage in this kind of world. Like you can't pray cancer away, like you just said, for your mom. What advice would you give people in terms of kind of that people can use to help make decisions and figure out their next steps in a healthy kind of way without placing too much of their own power like in other people? And then also give some context about how you started doing that for yourself, how you started tapping into your own intuitive, you know, powers.
So for me, as I said before, like I've always been very pro, you know, mental health and working with a therapist. And so for me, my therapist she's amazing, and I've been with her for a couple of years now. And so she is a licensed social worker. So she's trained, licensed, everything. But for me, what I love about her personally is that she is spiritual, you know, so she doesn't dismiss certain things, you know, and then, you know, when certain things can cross the line and get too woo-woo, it's like, you know, she'll help ground me. But so I've always kind of like looked for that support system where people aren't like, oh, that stuff's not real, you know. What I started to notice for me is that, like, so my father was an army vet, and he was actually diagnosed schizophrenic. And so he was on, you know, medication his entire life. And people have told me, you know, whether psychics that I've seen or just, I mean, sometimes random people that I've encountered that are mediums or something, like they'll tell me things about my dad. And these are people that like I don't even know. And they're just like, your dad just had a gift. He wasn't crazy, you know. So for me, it's like when I started like researching a lot of this stuff, because for me, when I was, you know, I was never fully diagnosed, but they were treating me for my moods, which I also wasn't very honest about how much I was drinking, which clearly affects your moods. But they started giving me mood stabilizers, treating me as if I had bipolar disorder, but I was never fully diagnosed. And whether I was or I wasn't, it's irrelevant, because I started doing all this research about people that get diagnosed with mental health, you know, disorders, and schizophrenia specifically, and bipolar being another one. And it turns out later on they come, you know, into alignment with the fact that they're mediums and they're able to kind of connect more with that spiritual realm. And so for me, making sense of it now, you know, as I've developed more of my own gifts, right? And as I said, like, this is available to everyone. Like, we are all born with these gifts. Like, we're all animals. Like, I tell people that all the time. I'm like, you know, when there's an animal out in the wilderness and they know there's a predator coming, even though they don't see it, they don't feel it. I had read the book, The Gift of Fear.
The light literally hit me in the face. That statement must have meant something. Spirit's like, here's the light. Come to the light. That was I don't know if it's a bad omen or a good one, but either way, I've seen the light. That's animals. I'm clearly not an animal. I didn't sense that coming towards my face.
What gift?
Or I need to work on my animal instincts. My reflex wasn't as fast. Animal print shirt. This is not working out in theme.
I think your facial reaction was the best. You were like,
Oh gosh, I love it. I love it. So back to animals. So yeah.
So, so we all have these gifts. We're all animals, and so there's this book, The Gift of Fear. I forget the author, but I had read this book years ago, and it just talks about like your instinct, your intuition, and which is better known as like your clair gift of like clairsentience, right? Like when you just feel like something is wrong. And I feel like I've always been a very I've actually, as I started to explore this stuff, I would take all those little online quizzes and stuff. And for me, it was always feelings. Like it's just always, I've been a very strong feeling person. And so, I would notice too, like connecting back to the drinking, it's like, they say alcohol really lowers your vibrations, right? And then it can just kind of allow for anything to come in. And, you hear all these stories about, people that, they drink. And I mean, everybody's probably been there if you've ever drank, but you do a bunch of stuff and you don't even realize, or you see like sometimes how a person's like whole face expression can change. And it's like, that's not even this person anymore, And so sometimes, in the spiritual community, they talk about how it can just be, spirits coming in and just kind of, taking the driver's seat for a little bit. So yeah, so for me, I've always, I've had experiences in my life where I have like sense spirits. So I'm not really someone, I'll see shadows and stuff, but I don't really, and I'm always just like, I don't want to see anything.
Yeah. I do the same. I don't feel you. I don't see you. I don't know. I'm just keeping all the lights on when I go to sleep.
Right. But when you like feel a presence. So I had my cousin passed a couple of years back, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I felt the presence of a man in my bedroom. It had to be like 4 a.m. And it was so there that I sat up, right? And I was just looking around. I turned on the light and everything. And I felt like the person sat on my bed. Like I actually felt like someone sat on my bed. And then I called my mom the next day, and I was like, because this has happened to my mom too. And so I'm like, I had this weird encounter last night, and I tell her. And then hours later, our family's in Colombia, they called us and they said that my cousin was murdered the night before. And I remember when I told my mom, I was like, I felt like there was a man in my room, like a presence. And she's like, oh, maybe it was your father, because my father had just passed at that point, like a year before. And I was like, no, I didn't feel like it felt young, And my cousin and I were the same age. Our birthdays were actually like a week apart. And so, and I felt at that point when I found out, I was like, I didn't know who it was, but I'm like, I felt like he came by, So I think that when I would drink, or I should say now I know more, when I would drink, I would just, you can't really control, like if you're like an open channel, you can't really control. But again, anyone can develop this stuff, especially like through meditation and through like just raising your own vibration, right? Like, we talk about even like the state of the world right now, like fear is such a low vibrational, like, and it just really pulls you down. And obviously we know like love is up there, so it's not this whole just like love and light all the time. Obviously we're human. But all those low vibrational like emotions, like just, and they're necessary too. It's not like we're still humans, and that's the thing. It's like it's like but learn to use them productively, like not to let it, sadness it's an emotion. Like I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, like feelings come and go, even the good feelings, you can be really happy right now and laughing, and then that's gonna go too.
Kind of what you're saying too, like the question in terms of like what tools can you use, or like how do you tap into these powers, like this is a good segue to kind of what you're saying, where trying to process and realize that everything has two extremes, right? So you said sadness and happiness, and like neither one is good or bad. Like it's just what they are, and it's okay to feel both. But kind of piggybacking on that and this idea of shadow work and transmutation, right? Or examples like comedians, right? And talking about alchemy, like maybe you can kind of explain your experience with kind of these types of words in the community, like shadow work, transmutation, alchemy, and how you should be looking at emotions and processing, or just whatever comes to mind around that type of topic.
Yes. Oh, a lot of like, even like my own, I'm going to pick like my relationships with men, right? I was always a big drinker myself. So I always gravitated towards men that would drink, but my father was actually an alcoholic. So, like, people say things like, oh, you always marry someone who's like your dad, or guys, look for someone that, like, so obviously we connect that back to like Freud and psychology, right? And all those theories.
Yep.
But there's so much truth to that, because that's your first example of love. And when you're a child, that's where you develop like your attachment style, right? So if you're someone who's like anxiously attached or more detached, it has to do with the attention that you received in those early stages of your life. So that's like the psychology aspect of it, right? But it ties so much in with spirituality, because for me, it's like, if we're just focusing on like, okay, what happened back then and how did that make you feel? To me, that's not enough. I feel like in the time that I really started getting deep in my shadow work, I started to create alchemy with these negative memories, right? Where we can just look back and say, okay, that was really bad, and that made me feel, rejected, or it made me feel unloved, or however it made you feel. But to me, I started to just kind of transmute that energy, because, for example, like my father, like I said, he was an alcoholic, and I experienced a lot of trauma as a result of that. But when I took like that hat off of him and I just let him be a man, and I took away that expectation of like, you have to be a father and you have to be this figure for me and do this and that, right? It just looks like he failed almost, right? Like we would see what the expectation of a father is.
Yeah.
And then going back, I'm just kind of looking at him and I'm like, you're just a man.
Yep.
And you were struggling. And I understand that, because I'm a human and I'm now a parent, and you had emotions and you didn't have the right tools to work through that. And he was probably trying to deal with his own residual trauma. And this is when we get into like generational curses or generational traumas that get passed down, And so so going back to that, right? Like I see a big point for myself in relationships was almost feeling like, if it wasn't a successful relationship, right? It's almost like, well, why wasn't I enough for this person? And then I go all the way back to like my childhood, and I'm like, I remember asking my dad, please quit drinking, please quit smoking. And he would never want to, because that was his outlet. That was how he was coping. He was self-medicating, and that's all he really knew how to do. He didn't have YouTube to try to find things out, right? I mean, he just didn't have the proper resources. And and that's how he managed. Like, I mean, I think that it's so great for me now, because like when I decided to get sober, there was so much information. It was almost hard to choose, like, what do I watch? I have like, a whole watch list just ready for me to just get through it. But it really did inspire me so much. And I just look at him back in his time and I'm like, could he have done better? That's a choice, of course, but maybe he didn't know how. And it takes away any resentment. And it almost like, then I become empathetic, and I'm just like, you know what? I understand.
Compassion when you look at it that way. Like
right.
they always say, like a good tool is look at someone like they're a 5-year-old little boy, right? For your dad, look at his face. That kind of takes away some of that, and you just realize they're just like, we're all just little children inside trying to heal and find our way through at the end of the day.
Inside these human bodies with these human responsibilities. And I had tweeted something like that, actually. It was like when I started to look at the person who triggered me, or the person that hurt me, and just saw their inner child and realized that they triggered my inner child, right? It's kind of like, not to say that we shouldn't hold ourselves accountable, because we 1000% should, right? But it's more than just say like, hey, you know what, I did wrong, I'm sorry. Like, so how do you fix that? And then now it's like, I've been doing so much shadow work and like inner child healing, and it's kind of like, you know what, I'm not holding on to like that quote that says, if you drink like holding on to anger, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's like, you're carrying that. It's not, and even with my father, like he's transitioned, he's not, he's passed. And it's just kind of like, am I really just going to carry this wound forever? No, I don't want to pass that on to my children and have them pass it on to theirs.
It comes down just to awareness. Like that inner child, all it wants is recognition. Like there doesn't mean you have to do something about it or do all this crazy stuff. Literally, it's just listening and feeling it for a second to let those feelings pass, and acknowledgement. That's what kind of shadow work is. And compassion for yourself too, like remembering that you're just in this human experience the same way, trying to figure it out. And I think that's a good segue to the next kind of question, which is, I'm curious to see what you think some common misconceptions are about spirituality, because I think one we're talking about right now also are obviously misconceptions about shadow work, but also misconceptions about good and bad, right? Just emotions in general. And spiritual people, you know, if you're angry, people look at you like, oh, you're spiritual, you're supposed to know how to handle all these things and emotions. You're not supposed to be angry, right? That's a common spiritual kind of misconception. But what have you experienced in terms, you work with people, you read tarot, you know, what are kind of some misconceptions you've come across in your experience?
Well, I have had the experience of telling someone that they should put focus on shadow work, and they were like black magic? I'm like, no, that's not what that is.
Exactly.
You know, I know it sounds dark, and I try to explain it like, you know, who doesn't love the moon, right? It's beautiful, but like as much as we love the moon, especially when it's like a full moon and it's big and bright, the moon has a shadow side, right? Like it's just, we all have, and you know, oftentimes we're in situations in life and we're like in this tunnel looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you realize like you are that light, you know, and you cast a shadow and it's your shadow, and that's a part of you. And it's just like being able to work through that is not, it's not fun. It's not, but it's gonna pass, you know. And I just feel it's so essential to be able to like, we all have an ego. We are in human form. And so an ego is important because it defends us, right? So an ego is what steps in to kind of like defend you. But, you know, it's not like get rid of your ego. It's like, obviously, yeah, remove those societal masks, you know, like be your authentic self, you know, but you're still going to be human. So you're still going to have days that you're going to wake up and you might just be in a bad mood, and it might just anything. I mean, you're subjected to anything as a human being and you're going to react, you know, but what it is really being mindful is, I think that mindfulness is just the main thing of just being able to say, how do I respond to this versus reacting, you know, of being able, like I try to teach, my son is 9 and, you know, he's very quick to react like any 9-year-old, you know, if he gets upset, it's just like, there's a reaction. And I teach him to like stop and take 3 deep breaths and count to 5 and then act from there. And I think that we forget that as adults, especially when our inner child is constantly getting triggered. You know, we get defensive and, you know, we start going tit for tat, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you know, you can be spiritual. It's just knowing, it's just being able to be more. I've noticed that as I've like progressed on my spiritual journey, I'm just a lot more mindful, you know. So does that mean that I don't get angry? No, of course, you know, but I learned to take a step back and chill, and not like, you know, where me like 3 years ago, I probably would have threw something across the room. I'm like, well, that's not necessary. I just got to go pick that up, you know.
Now I just broke and I need that. It's broken, but I need it.
Or I'm able to say, I've actually been able to say in conversations now, like, you know what, actually, what you just said kind of triggered me, and I'm not going to respond to that because I feel like I'm just going to
triggered and projection. Like those are important words or terms in spirituality. But speaking of misconceptions, people sometimes think that like it's back to this accountability thing, right? They're like, that person triggered me. It has nothing to do with it. Like that person is a projection, but there's like a lack of accountability in this misconception that I'm talking about. Like people think I didn't do anything, so why do I need to work on healing myself, or what this is? Because the essence of that is realizing that everybody is you, you know, reflecting back at you. So even though they're triggering you, it's still a you problem. You're the common denominator in that situation, and that's where the work begins. So I think there's sometimes often like scapegoating sometimes in spirituality, or you know, another misconception is like just enlightenment overall, right? Where there are these people out there who think there's such a thing of reaching enlightenment, or like being the end all be all, or knowing what that one truth is, or, you know, the whole point of spirituality that I've come to know is obviously we don't know anything. We're all kind of learning. It's in waves, and it's about questioning. Like it's about asking questions constantly. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? What do I stand for? What are my values? Why is this triggering me? Why is like the biggest kind of question that I've come to have a really close relationship with on this spiritual journey. Is just the why behind the why. This person triggered me. Why? Because when I was 5, this happened. Well, why did you feel that way when you're 5? Well, because then this other thing happened. Well, why did you feel that way when that? And if you start like that pattern, you get to the root cause. That root cause is in you, and that's the shadow work we're talking about. So it requires spirituality requires belief and work, and that's misconception. People think you obtain spirituality, or someone like yourself with tarot readings gives you spirituality, but it's the opposite. It all starts and ends with you and the work you're doing.
Right. I always tell people in readings, it's just kind of like take what resonates and just like leave the rest, because it's not like, it's with me, especially with tarot, I feel like I believe that the future is ever changing, so with kind of like, being, I guess, like a spiritual influencer, it's not to like say like, sometimes I guess that's where it gets, I mean, we're human again, right? So these things are going to happen in whatever, realm, but it's like, sometimes people look at people and they're like, oh my God, she predicted this. She knows the future. People have given me feedbacks on readings, and they're just like, wow, you're so amazing. And I'm just kind of like, no, well, this is a pick a card. That was your intuition. Your own intuition led you to there because that's where the message was for you. So spirit kind of nudged you in that direction of like, hey, this is where the message, it has nothing to do with me. I'm just delivering the message, I do like, obviously I do like, I believe in like getting a private reading, because sometimes for certain things, it's kind of hard to like connect for yourself, especially when you're like emotionally attached. That's going to block that for you, because you're going to want to manipulate the response because you want what you want, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I am not opposed to other people reading and stuff like that for you. I do offer private readings and things like that. Or it could just be that someone, maybe they're going through something and they're so distraught that they kind of can't really connect with, come into alignment or raise their vibration enough to be able to hear the message that's trying to come in for them. So that's where it's great to, get a reading, but we're all here to help each other. And that's the thing about this journey, is that we are in this, we're all a part of this collective, right? And we can lean on one another when we need to, but we all have to learn to just kind of trust ourselves. And that's where, you start to really realize that everyone in your life is their own person. They're not an extension of you by any means, right? They're their own individual. Everyone is on their own journey.
Absolutely.
Even, some of my closest friends who are on the same spiritual journey with me, again, like we hate to use the word level, but we all have different things to work on, and we all have different strengths, and together combined, it's kind of like, it's beautiful the way that we all lean on it. Like, who to call when you need to talk about this or that, and that's what the human experience to me has become about. And it's just kind of like, even now, this would have never resonated with me last year, but even just thinking about my relationship and why we, went our separate ways, I don't know the future, right? I'm obviously emotionally invested in this situation. So for me, it's just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't even looked to get like a reading for an answer. I think the future is it's ever changing.
Absolutely.
Every second possible, So for me, when I think about that, I'm like, sometimes, people need to come into your life to activate you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go your separate ways, and maybe that's forever, or maybe you can reconnect at some point when we know. But I really just am learning to trust like divine timing and that divine intervention, because nothing is a coincidence. Like, that's, if I can take anything away up until this point, it's like everything happens for a reason. And now holding myself more accountable, because it's not like, this relationship went so bad, I can see, what I did wrong, what he did wrong. I could also just say, well, he had triggered me this way and my reaction was just a trauma response. No, like, but why did I even attract this into my life in the first place? What space was I operating in? Because no one is an extension of you. Everyone is their own person on their own journey. But the people that gravitate towards you, we're all energy. And this is all like, people that come in, they're all mirrors of you, so they're coming in to kind of show you something and show you what you need to grow. And it's not to say that every relationship is going to be traumatic or whatever, by any means. But once you come more into alignment, you start to attract more people that are on that same level.
Yeah, but that's on the opposite, it's true too for you, because you're also saying, though, it doesn't have to be all alignment and attracting the right people, which it is, but it's a great sentiment to this idea, which maybe tie back to that misconception thing, but that whole saying, you know, everything for a reason, people just tend to gravitate towards when things go their way for that, right? But like everything for a reason, where you have to also accept those times where it's not smooth sailing and have that same mentality to say everything for a reason, because in retrospect, and I know you have a few personal examples, but it is that divine timing and intervention that actually was a blessing. And as unclear as you are in those situations, as confused as you might be, as sad as you might be, as triggered as you might be, like as you're going through that storm, you can't like see 2 feet in front of you with all the craziness. But in retrospect, when it all unfolds the way it should, you do have this moment of clarity. And it sucks not knowing when that will be, but you take solace in spirituality, knowing eventually it will make sense in the grander scheme. But it applies to those times. Actually, those are the most important times in our life, are when we're being tested that way, to be like, okay, this isn't going in my favor right now, or this is a really crappy situation, but like it is that faith. And I love that quote. Every person hears it about faith isn't about seeing to believe, it's believing to see, right? So that's like this whole concept too. But you have some beautiful examples where you were going through really hard times through this awakening, and you talked a lot about having self-doubt and like questioning yourself and just being so confused. But in retrospect, now you're sitting here, what would you say are 1 or 2 of the biggest lessons you can say, wow, I get why that didn't work out now?
Well, so for me, after I experienced the miscarriage, we really tried to conceive again. We're really trying to get pregnant. And obviously a lot plays into that, right? Like if you're stressed out and whatever. But, there were honestly so many moments, Abby, where I was just like, I'm not even stressed. Like I was just kind of like detaching from the outcome. I'm like, it'll happen. Like at first, I'm 33. So last year I was 32. I was just like, yeah, I'm going to get pregnant. Like, no, like what's going to go wrong? And then, granted, there were other things too. Like I was like, I was drinking and stuff, but I'm just kind of like, I mean, at my age, I really don't see why it's that difficult, And, I was praying so much. I was just kind of like, I just really want to get pregnant again. And I honestly got to a point where it like did like the opposite. Like I was just like, wow, God is like not listening to me. I'm just being forsaken, right? And like sometimes we forget, like when we're trying to manifest or we're praying for something, it's like you're not being ignored. Sometimes the answer is no or not right now, for whatever reason. And when everything happens, it was just kind of like I look at it now, it's just kind of like, well, the answer was no at that time, because it was just kind of like, no, this is not what you need. This is not the path that you're supposed to go down. Right. And, I can't speak for, for his side of things. I see what this has done for me and how it's really, like, again, like that tsunami just came and it was just kind of like, well, you know what? Now there's no ignoring your calling or your purpose. Like this is where you need to go. And, I would hope that, it did something for him, but that's not my journey. But it's just kind of like, if that had never happened, I think about the person that I am today and the person that I was last year. And if we had continued in the relationship we were living, the lives that we were, I can't even, it's not even like I'm a different person, Abby. Like I'm still me.
Yeah, well, you are the truest you right now. Yeah.
It's just like the way that I function on a day-to-day now is so different. Like I am not, the things that I used to stress over, I don't stress over. Like the things that don't like used to resonate and like needed to be a part of my life just aren't anymore. And it's just like this shift happened. And of course, like, like my family is still my family. It's all the same people, but I'm happy to say that it's just, I just feel like it's a much healthier version of me. And, and it's not to say, and obviously, and it's not to say that relationship made me unhealthy, but when I went into it, I wasn't who I was now. And it's just almost like, I might've not gone down this path. Maybe, maybe it could have went differently. And this was just how it happened for me. And it's so unique for everyone. There are different things that just kind of activate, but I feel like, when you're getting the call and you keep ignoring it, and you're like, not right now, maybe later.
There's no voicemail. It's calling you until you pick up.
Like, okay, this is your comfortable life. Here we go. There you go. Now you go from there, and it's always a choice. It's always a choice. I feel like whatever, for me, this is, I'm like, this is part of my purpose. This is part of my journey, doing the work, sharing my experience, and helping
When
other
you start
people.
listening to that call, to that nudge that we're talking about, and start aligning yourself with that, or asking questions, or having acceptance that this is my situation, the more you start taking steps to listen and listen and listen, that's when things start to align and kind of crumple as you see it then, even though in order to crumple, what has to happen is something else has to rebuild and come in. And one cool example that you told me offline that it aligns you with your purpose and you didn't know it at the time was how you were recently trying to sign a lease for a new place for your own business, and you for some reason decided you listened to this voice that said don't do this, stop. You had no idea why you were saying no to this, but you listened to it, you canceled the contract, and then this whole quarantine kind of happened. Talk a little bit about that experience and what lessons you learned from that.
So I'm an esthetician, by like trade, I guess. And so I have a beauty company, and I specialize in eyebrows and eyelashes. And so, I was moving, my lease was up in one place, and I had already signed a contract from months before for this new build. And, it was a really good prime location. It was very exciting. I had went to go see the space, and I just wasn't like feeling it. And, they had delays and stuff like that. And that wasn't really so much of the issue because I knew it was progressing, it was going to get done. So it wasn't a thing about impatience, but I really had to sit with myself, and I'm like, is this an impulsive decision? Are you being frustrated? But I heard something say, just cancel it. Can't. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't know why, but I'm going to trust this again. I just kind of feel like I was being shifted into this different direction, like start laying the bricks for this foundation, because this is not really going to be it for you anymore.
That's so beautiful, but you're led that way just by listening. That's the key point. You might not know why, it might not feel right, but listen and trust. And
trust.
This one isn't so much of a segue, but I always think it's interesting when people I talk to have children, and I kind of want to just get a pulse on, you talked a lot about your family being super Catholic growing up. You went to Catholic school, you went to this philosophy class, you got to kind of tap into all these other ideas. We talked a little bit about how you don't truly believe in like a universal truth. So how does all of these ideas then translate to how you talk about spirituality and religion with children, or your children at least?
So when we look at religions, the main thing, so the idea of like organized religion, like just never really resonated with me, right? So when we look at, religions, the main teachings are all pretty much the same, right? Like you're just really teaching people to have morals, whether you're instilling it in them by granting, like, instilling a fear of God, where you're just kind of like, a system of rewards and punishments or whatever the case is. But however it is, it's kind of like, I just look at it like they were, created to just kind of help keep people in line and just, so that they had good morals. So I don't judge anyone for what they believe in, whatever resonates, but for me personally, I think it's a personal choice. So I did, I've taught my kids about Catholicism. My daughter actually attends a Catholic school. It just never resonated with me. And I know all the teachings and everything. And so I'm like very educated in it. It just doesn't give me that spark of like connection. But she's 13, my son is 9. And so she was supposed to do her confirmation this year, but because of the pandemic, that's been put on hold. But my son has never even been baptized. And, my son believes in past lives and in, what is the word? Past lives and
answers
when you reincarnation.
Reincarnation. I was going to say every spiritual word I knew in a minute. I thought it was a game and I was getting ready.
Baby game, ready, go. My son believes in past lives and reincarnation, and my daughter does believe, in heaven and hell. And, they both have great morals. They're both great children, very proud of them, obviously, but that's the main thing. And I just don't want to force anything that doesn't resonate with them. My son comes out of nowhere and drops like these spiritual, he says like, we start here and we have all these endless possible paths that we can pick from, but every path leads the same way, like basically saying like everything leads to death, and then that path comes right back and you start over. And that was before I even spoke to him. This is when I actually started to talk to him about reincarnation, because I was just kind of like, where did you get this from? you know, I'm like, where did this come from? And then, you know, I started, because he's 9, so we've never really fully had these conversations. We've never really, you know, had a reason to talk about like life after death or anything. It's never really come up, but he just came out of nowhere one day and started talking about that. And I'm like, that just naturally resonates with him. Like, that's just what he, you know, I believe kids are open channels and they get like communications.
I was just gonna say
We're the ones that as we get older and like there's all this societal conditioning and then we get blocked, you know. But when they're small like that, you know, they're very open and just very in tune with everything.
And I think that's the point I'm making with even bringing up children, which is why I'm so interested. It's because like just this idea of when that gets cut off or how to uncover all these layers, but we have so much to learn from children just overall for like whatever we call spirituality. But just like you said, it's like common principles, like being open, right? Children are these open channels. It's about love, which children have unconditional love. They don't see race, they don't see color, they don't see anything. They say we are one without having to be told that. Children are so tapped in and intuitive without even knowing it. Like we have these truths, like it's us as adults who put judgment or titles or labels or feelings, but at the end of the day, it's just we're all saying the same thing. And I always say this, but in so many different ways. But I think we have so much to learn from just children. So I always get curious to see if they bring it up to you or how these happen, especially in family dynamics where there are varying kind of ideologies. But I agree that there's no universal kind of truth. Everyone's on their own path, having their own experience. And it's about, at the end of the day, being a good person, like the best person that you can be. And that all actually goes back to what we're talking about, which is turning that arrow finger back to you, like starting with you as your own vessel, healing yourself. And that's a full circle, just turning the fingers right back at you. It's like so simple, yet it's so complicated. It's one of those things where you try to say it in so many different ways, but you're just like, I feel like it's so funny because in every spiritual person you follow, it's like, it comes back to love. And we use all these cliches because they're so simple, but honestly, they're a reason. They're cliches because it's the only truth that way. Like we all say the same things because there's only so many ways you can explain unconditional love, but it's real. When you experience that yourself, it's like undeniable. And that's the personal experience I'm talking about. We could talk till we're blue in the face to try to be like, no, but you have to believe this or do this. But it's until that personal connection, that feeling, like you said, that makes you get addicted to that feeling that you start chasing. It's like, until someone experiences that, it's such a profound thing. You can't tell anybody who they are, what they should believe, etc. And I think it gets a little bit mucky in the spiritual community that way.
Our brains are amazing and we just love to overcomplicate things. Like we just don't like to accept that it can actually just be that simple and that it just is about love and that it just is about like ourselves. Realize, you know, you can have an appreciation for yourself, and obviously we're always our own worst critics, but when there is really a lack of self-love, what do you expect from someone else? Like so a lot of what I've been saying lately is like, you teach people how to love you. Like I've been doing kind of like a lot of like these tweets and posts on Instagram about relationships, because I think that for people throughout this time of isolation, a lot is coming up and they're reflecting and, you know, making jokes about like not texting your ex or whatever. Like don't let the lockdown get to you. But it's true. Like how much do you value yourself? And like you set the standard for how the people love you. Sounds so cliche, you know, the whole loving yourself first thing. And I think that, you know, we do something good for ourselves and we're just like, oh, I love myself. And it's just like, no, there's so much more. It's so much more deeper. Like you're worth the healing, you know. Anything, like I always tell people, like, you know, you may not be responsible for the trauma that happened to you. Sometimes we really are victims of things, you know, but you're 100% responsible for healing yourself. And it's not to do it for anyone else but yourself, just to get yourself to a much better, because when you come into alignment and there's so much more self-love, you know, you're so much more selective as far as where your energy goes.
It's like, again, so simple. Like your mission though is to be you, like you said. Like we get it so twisted. We spend most of our lives trying to be someone else, trying to be like that YouTuber we want to be like, trying to be like the movie actresses or magazines we see, trying to be everybody but ourselves. if you step into this like light work, for example, or spirituality, it doesn't mean you have to be a tarot card reader or a light worker. Like the world needs you. That your mission could be the nurse, especially in times like right now. The mission could be a hairdresser or esthetician who's listening to the mom who just finally got in first 3 months after having a baby, who just needed that outlet. Like people just get it twisted, and it's so simple. It's you, and that doesn't come with conditions either. You could be whatever that calling is, that listening, that is the work, that is the spirituality, that is the questioning, that is the healing, that is the love for yourself, in terms of like how we talked about love and relationships. It's loving yourself first through all of those ways I just said. Like that's simple, but yes, a year and a half later, I'm still like, who am I? Do I love myself? I don't know, Elsie. I need relationship advice for myself.
You have a purpose, every single one of us. We're not here by accident. Like we are all here, you know, and we're all serving a purpose. And once you come into alignment with what your purpose is, it's like, I wholeheartedly believe it's like, you know, spirit, God, source, universe, whatever resonates with you, they're not going to put you here and give you this mission. You're not going to go broke or tired or hungry or frustrated or whatever it is doing what your soul was sent here to do. Like you're going to fulfill your role, and you will be taken care of. And that's a part of the trust of knowing that you are living a life on purpose, not just letting life happen to you.
Yeah.
And that's it.
How can people find you for advice and to tap into the beautiful being you are, for your purpose plugs for how we can all find you?
So it's so funny because I've always had the XO thing, because I'm like, oh, it's cute. What is that? Like hearts and kisses, right? Or hugs and kisses or whatever. And I'm like, I made it complicated because it's a 0. So I just XO,
you're
and I'm
one
like,
of
oh,
those.
It's a 0. It's a 0. I'm a 0.
I'm taking back my hug. I'm taking back my hugs and kiss.
0. So yeah, no, I'm probably most active on Instagram. I try to put a lot of daily content, whether it's sharing other, you know, inspirational accounts. I follow a lot of like spiritual and like, you know, psychology accounts and stuff like that. So whether it's sharing stuff like that on my stories or just even creating content on my own feed. And so that's at Elsie.x0 on Instagram. YouTube, I'm just starting my YouTube journey. So I'm doing pick a cards every Tuesday, because I thought a tarot Tuesday thing would be I'm actually ask people like, what do you want the next one to be, just so that I can kind of give them, you know, what they're looking for. And I might do, I think every other Saturday, I'll do like every other Sunday, I'll do like a spiritual psychology one. So yeah, so I'm really excited to start growing that.
Please make sure you go over and subscribe and support this beautiful human being.
Thank you so
much. To take us out, what would be your kind of final words of advice for anyone watching this?
Really bringing it back to self, like how I think we said this entire conversation. It really just starts with you, and everything else is just a reflection of you. And, you know, everything just starts to, I see what has happened in my life, you know, up until this point, and it's just, everything just starts to come into alignment, and you start to really, when you start to become an active co-creator of your life, working with the universe, or again, whatever resonates with you, but you are co-creating your life, and you're not just letting life happen to you, you know. And you're stepping into that purpose, and you will never regret doing that work on yourself, ever.
1000%. That is true. And I love how the universe has a sense of humor sometimes too. And I just say that because look at how beautiful this person is. I find no irony in the sense that you're an esthetician and help people with beauty physically, yet you're also doing the inner work and helping people transform their inner beauty. So I think there's no accidents, you know, and I think it's just literally beautiful, like how that actually works out for your purpose. So again, I just want to say you're welcome. I want to say thank you to you again for your time, for all of the knowledge, and honestly for being so raw and sharing some personal stories with everyone on this audience, and being your true self and vulnerable enough to do that, because I think we all take lessons in that, and in you doing it, it gives so many other people permission to do the same. And that's why I love this channel, I love this platform, and I love the community out there watching. So I will put all of Elsie's information in the description below, and make sure you go and support her. And thank you again. I really truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.